Hi everyone. I wanted to finish up the Islamic material with you. I think last time we got through the teachings of the Prophet, the 5 pillars, the 6 articles of faith, some his biography. So let's go ahead and continue on and learn a little more information as I share my screen about Islam and focusing in a little bit more today. We're focusing today in this Zoom presentation on the branches and also on an aspect of Islam called Sufism, which is the mystical approach. So I believe we covered all of this. The one section I forgot to mention is right around here. We have the migration on. Basically, I'm reviewing something that I forgot to mention last time. We talk about the life of the Prophet. We talk about how he was raised in Mecca. We talk about how he migrated to Medina. And one thing I forgot to mention in that is that that was called the Great Migration, and it is called the Hijra. The Hijra is the Great Migration, and Hijra is a very well-known event that happens in Islam. They date their calendar based on that. So the calendar for Islam is based on the Great Migration. That's the beginning of the Islamic calendar. They call it AH after the Hijra. So having said that, let's move down here to the branches. I want to focus on Sunni and Shiite, and then we'll move to the others. So there's 2 large branches that we need to discuss. The majority branch is the Sunnis. They represent about 85% of the 1.6 billion Muslims on this planet. They, again, what constitutes them as being Muslim is the Four Noble Truths I almost said, but the 5 pillars of Islam and the 6 articles of faith. They recognize that following the death of Muhammad, that there were 4 caliphs, kind of successors, not prophets, but kind of leaders of the Islamic community to carry on the teachings, and they recognize 4 of them. And those 4 are Abu Bakr, which was his dear friend, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. And Ali, the 4th one, is quite significant because that was his son-in-law married to his daughter Fatima and also his cousin. And they were blood related, and that's important to mention here. The reason why is because when we get to the Shiite, they will not agree that there were 4 caliphs, so that really went directly to Ali, and that Ali was the rightful successor of the Prophet, the rightful leader to carry on the teachings of Islam. And that is because Muhammad is bloodline related to Ali. And so that's what sets those 2 movements as distinct movements. It was really started off initially as a succession dispute. And again, for recognizing, the Sunnis recognizing 4 caliphs, the Shiites recognizing Ali's, and the lineage that followed Ali. So that really is what sets them apart. Other things do as well later on theologically, but it really starts off with that succession dispute. So let's talk about the Shiite for a minute. Their name literally means the party of Ali. And one thing that they argue is that following Ali, there were successors, and they call them imams. They use the word imam not as a scholar, not as a prayer leader of the mosque, but they use the word imam in a much more honorific title, not equal to the Prophet, but certainly honorific. And Ali, and then following Ali was another imam, another imam, another imam through a historical lineage. And the majority of Shiites are called the Twelvers because they recognize 12 imams. There are some pockets of Shiites that are the Fivers that recognize 5, or the Seveners who recognize 7, but the majority are the Twelvers, and that's what we're going to focus on, the Twelvers. They believe that the last imam went into hiding, and it's a period of what's called occultation, and that imam will come back in time at the end of the world, and that imam they refer to as Mahdi. Mahdi is that futuristic prophet who's already been born, but is kind of coming out of hiding and coming back into society, usher in a period of peace, usher in a period against oppression, and so forth. Now, the Sunnis also recognize Mahdi, but they don't believe that Mahdi has yet been born, that Mahdi is a futuristic person that will come and usher in, that period of peace as well. So the difference is the Sunnis do not believe Mahdi has been born, the Shiites do, and the Mahdi is in hiding. Now, from that concept of Mahdi in hiding, there have been 2 movements down here, which I'll jump right here, is to the Baha'i and the Ahmadiyya Muslims. And what's interesting about them is they're both in like the 1800s and the 1900s. Out of these 2 movements was connected back to that Mahdi concept, that in the Baha'i in Persia or Iran, somebody at that time declared himself, I am the Mahdi, I am the one you've been waiting for. Now, he was imprisoned for that, and eventually like arrested and imprisoned for that because it was kind of scandalous to say, but a whole movement developed out of that. It's referred to as the Baha'i. And the Baha'i has some interesting teachings. They argue for kind of pulling the whole planet together under one government, one language, male and females viewed as equally, and also religions on equal footing. And that's what I find fascinating about the Baha'i. They argue that Buddha was a prophet, and Jesus was a prophet, and Krishna was a prophet, even though we don't have any evidence of Krishna existing. They argue that Mahavira was a prophet. And so they'll look at the world leaders, the world religions, the founders of them, and say these are all prophets of Allah. And so it's very open, eclectic, and tolerant of other religions. And then the Ahmadiyya Islamic branch here, again, starts off in, I believe it was the 1800s or 19th century. And again, somebody had declared himself the Mahdi, and following that, he had several successors. There's also nuances to this movement. They have a little bit different takes on who Jesus was and stuff. Like, I believe that the Sunnis and the Shiites do not recognize Jesus as having been crucified, but the Ahmadiyya do. So there's like a slight nuances there. But what's interesting is they do fit under the Islamic fold. They do fit under that umbrella because they do recognize the 5 pillars and the 6 articles of faith. They themselves recognize themselves as Muslim. Other movements might look at them and say, oh, no, you don't fit because you think something a little bit nuanced and different than us. But certainly from an academic perspective, they do fit there. The Nation of Islam is the 1930s movement. Elijah Muhammad was one of the major players there. And it was really kind of an American movement. It was really the Black community kind of setting up their own understanding of what Islam was about. And Malcolm X was part of that movement for a while and ended up rejecting it while he went on the Hajj himself to Saudi Arabia and experienced the Hajj was not, a race issue. It wasn't a skin color issue. It was all human beings merging together to experience a religious ritual in the name of Allah. And so he rejected the Nation of Islam. Today, the Nation of Islam, well, it's been under the leadership of Louis Farrakhan. I'd have to actually Google if he's still alive. I'm not sure, actually. So that would be interesting to learn more about that one as well. Now, the last one I want to talk about are the Sufis. And to get there, I'm actually going to change this page, and I'm going to go to my Sufi page. And where are we? Yay, here we are. So here on Sufism, the word Sufism literally means wool. And they wear white wool, and the reason why they wear white wool, it represents asceticism, it represents purity, it represents simplicity, it represents a rejection of materialism and things of this world. That's simple asceticism. And it is indeed a mystical branch within Islam. Some people say it's not, some people, let me see if I can clarify this, that it's not its own distinct branch, that it's a mystical aspect within Islam that you'll find in the Sunni branch and you'll find in the Shiite branch. So it's not so much its own branch, but a mystical approach within those branches. So that's one way to tackle it and understand it. A lot of focus of Sufism is on mysticism and meditation and connecting with Allah and its internal introspection and contemplation. And it's not so much about external prayers, but internal and focusing within oneself. And a lot of it focuses on the sense of bhakti and love and devotion and merging into the divine. And so you can see how in its early stages, when it starts off as an 8th and 9th century movement, some of it may be misinterpreted by some traditional Muslims as being a little bit heretical, a little scandalous, because, for instance, I'll jump you down here to influential characters. One of them, named Al-Hassan, he had argued in his ecstatic mystical state of oneness with the infinite, with Allah. He said, I am the truth. I am Allah. And for that, he was arrested and assassinated. He was beheaded because it was kind of scandalous to say that you are Allah. But if you understand it from a mystical perspective, it wouldn't be, because he was experiencing that sense of melting in with the beloved, that sense of connecting with the higher truth, the higher reality, however one defines that. Now, Al-Ghazali was a defender or an apologist for Sufism and wrote about it in, I believe it was the 12th century, and really made it much more acceptable to be a Sufi. He explained that the Sufis didn't mean it in a heretical way, but one out of devotional bhakti and love and so forth, and really meant it in a very truly mystical sense. And two other influential characters, I'd start with Rabia. She was in the 700s or the 8th century, and she was a female Sufi and a very well-known one. And she wrote material also on the sense of longing, the sense of the beloved and the lover, kind of, you know, that sense of feeling one with the infinite. Her biography is quite interesting. She was born so poor, so very poor, that she was sold into slavery as a young woman or a young child. I forgot exactly when that happened, but that her slave owner, her master, recognized her as extremely special and extremely spiritual because he saw this glowing light around her head and released her and gave her her freedom. And there's a story that I printed up. I think it was a kind of a cool one. She says, one day she's seen running through the streets of Basra, carrying a pot of fire in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. When asked what she was doing, she said, I want to put out the fires of hell and burn down the rewards of paradise because they block the way to Allah. I do not want to worship from fear of punishment or for the promise of a reward, but simply for the love of Allah. I loved that. I thought that was really cool. It really captures a part of Sufism, to understand that it's not about rewards or punishments or getting somewhere. It's about truly honoring and truly loving and having that sense of bhakti with Allah. So that was really cool. Now, that whole message of love is found in the poetry of Rumi as well. Rumi is one of the most beloved poets on the planet. Even in America, he's considered the most famous poet. And Rumi's poetry is filled with longing and filled with love and filled with devotion for Allah. But he also has it, and a lot of his poetry focuses on his teacher. A lot of longing and missing of his own spiritual teacher, who is Shams Tabriz. And there's a lot of references to Shams Tabriz in Rumi's poetry. And it's kind of, if you understand it from an Indian perspective, it's Guru Bhakti. It's Guru is your teacher, and Bhakti is love and devotion. It's Guru Bhakti towards Shams Tabriz. So that's something that might help explain why you see Shams Tabriz's name a lot in Rumi's poetry. And what Sufis are famous for, they're famous for their whirling dances. They're called whirling dervishes, where they're spinning and spinning and spinning. And some of the films I have show you this beautiful spinning. And when they're in that state of spinning, they feel this sense of ecstasy, this sense of dizziness, where they feel connected, that sense of union with Allah or God. And it's referred to as kind of meditation through spinning. So it's kind of a meditative dance itself. And if you watch their expressions, they're kind of in a state of rapture, is how it's viewed. And also part of Sufism is some of their Sufi chants, and it's called Dhikr. And I have some films showing you Dhikr. And since I'm on that, let me just pop one in and see how I can share this with you. I don't have much time left I forgot when I started this Zoom, but I don't want to ever go over 30 minutes with you. Let's just click on this for a second. Just watch two of these. Okay, I just gave you a little glimpse. It continues, and then this one as well. Just a glimpse. See if I can get rid of this ad. There we go. Okay, just a tiny glimpse of what Dhikr is about, that sense of chanting and that sense of prayer with the prayer leader. So again, Sufism is a mystical aspect of Islam. And for the reading, I have a couple small things to read, but then I give you guys a couple Sufi books that Mount Sac has published. Every one of these is a Mount Sac publication. And so this Conference of the Bird, let me give you a little bit of insight to that, because that's a fun one. It's an allegory, it's a story, and it's very symbolic. And it's about a group of, I think there's like 30 birds, and they're looking for their king, they're looking for their god, so to speak. It's very symbolic. They're looking for the divine, they're looking for their king. And one bird takes charge. He's like the whoopee bird, they say. And he says, well, you have to go travel through these valleys, and you have to go on this long journey. And then you'll find, I always have a hard time saying this name, but Sigmorg. You'll find Sigmorg, and he is the king. So these birds go on this long quest and this long journey. It represents like the soul going on the quest to find God. And when they get there, not many birds make it. A lot of the birds don't make it, but when they get there, there's nothing but a lake. And they look in the lake and they see their own reflection. And so they found their God, they found their king. It's a reflection of their own self. What would that mean if you understand that mystically? It's that higher truths are found within oneself, that we're part and parcel connected with the divine. It's the deep mystical message within that concept of looking at the lake and finding the higher truth there. So you can see how the Conference of the Birds is a very mystical text. And this is the author of it, Farid Undin Attar. And it reads quite beautifully, and there's an audible. You can listen to it if you want to. And then there's a few Rumi text here. This is Rumi, this is Rumi, this is Rumi, this is Hafiz. I hope I'm saying that right. This is a very popular book as well. Another Sufi mystic poet. And so just to sit down, open one of those, maybe on your iPad or your phone, and just for 20 minutes, just let it wash over you, this love poetry, and just have an experience, a Sufi experience, so to speak. If you want to have another Sufi experience, you can put on a long white dress and whirl around your living room. That's another thing you can do. You can do your dhikr and do your chants. I just want you to have that understanding of what Sufism is and to kind of experience it through the poetry, really, not through the dance. That was all just a tease. Okay. Hopefully this helped you guys understand Sufism. This is a symbol, a modern day symbol of Sufism, and it talks about the heart with the wings, and the heart is both earthly and heavenly, and it soars upward to heaven, the wings rising up, and the heart symbolizes responsiveness or love. And so it's this whole, like, your heart soars to God through mysticism and meditation and prayer. So that's kind of the idea there. Okay, I think I covered the main ideas of Sufism. What else did I want to say? Is there anything else? Post question? So to discuss Sufism and then other mystical writings that I offered you, read them. I said 20 minutes just now, 20 to 30, let's just say 20 to 30 is fine. And then, you know, tell me what you read and what your reflections on it. So I just like you to have an experience of it. It's not supposed to be a painful assignment. It's supposed to be just read love poetry and write up about it. So I hope you enjoyed that. I give you a lot of options. Okay, I will end again with the Sufi greeting of salam, which means peace. And I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.